Hello, BookTube. It's Friday, and on BookTube, that means Friday Reads, when we all talk about the books that are on our radar or that we've just read, or all that whole mixture of sort of a temperature taking, a signpost in the week. What I usually do on this channel is a TBR BY, a to be read by you, where I look ahead at the upcoming month or the upcoming few weeks and tell you books that I have already read that I can strongly recommend to you. I want to apologize ahead of time if you can pick up construction sounds in this video. Massachusetts just recently went to phase 1 of its reopening after getting hit pretty hard by this pandemic. And part of phase 1 very much is that construction work can resume. And this whole neighborhood right now is a hellscape of construction, so we're going to have to deal with that. But I've got 6 books that I want to show you here. All 6 I have read, and I'll tell you a little bit about the book and put it, so to speak, on your radar. The first one we'll deal with is, I don't want to make Sarah at Steeped in Books angry here, but what I believe the publisher would categorize this as is new adult, so-called new adult. Books about very, very young adults, but not actual young adult literature, not people who are in school, but people who are just making it out in the world. And this is by Ashley Poston, and it's called Bookish and the Beast. Let me read you a bit about it here. Rosie Thorne is feeling stuck on her college application essays in her small town and on the mysterious General Sand cosplayer she met at Excelsicon. General Sand being a fictional character there. Most of all, she's stuck in her grief over her mother's death. Her only solace was her late mother's library of rare Starfield novels, but even that disappeared when they sold it to pay off hospital bills. In contrast, Vance Raines has been Hollywood royalty for as long as he can remember, and with all the privilege and scrutiny that entails. But when a tabloid scandal catches up to him, he's forced to hide out somewhere in the paparazzi would never expect to find him. Small town USA. At least there's a library in the house. Too bad he doesn't read. When Rosie and Vance's paths collide and a rare book is accidentally destroyed, Rosie finds herself working to repay the debt. And while most of Starfield fans would jump at the chance to work in close proximity to the Vance Raines, Rosie has discovered something about Vance. He's a jerk, and she can't stand him. The feeling is mutual. But as Vance and Rosie begrudgingly get to know each other, their careful masks come off, and they may just find there's more risk in shutting each other out than in opening their hearts. And as you might be able to tell from that description, this has at least an articulated, very intentional backdrop of bookishness, as you can tell from the title. The superfans are superfans really of the novels, of the Starfield novels, and there's one novel in particular that keeps coming up throughout this book. And all of the characters have connection to literature of some kind or other, including the main character, who is extremely bookish. And the problem that I usually have with books like this is that they hate reading. They would deny it to their dying breath. The authors would say, no, I wrote a book about the love of reading. But what happens at the end, what tends to happen at the end of these books, is that the two characters who have been edging in a world of books closer and closer to falling in love with each other will fall in love with each other and basically throw the books aside. Okay, now we found what's really important. And you get the strong sense that they never go into a library again. And I was worried about that in this case, but I didn't get that sense at all. This doesn't really do that. I mean, I don't know why anybody would do that with a bookish book, but I've seen that pattern so many times that I just assume now that a bookish book is going to do that. That what it really is, what the novel really is not a journey towards love, but a journey to free yourself from caring about dumb old books. And this book doesn't do that. And in addition to that, there is a subplot in here that has genuine emotional heft. I wasn't expecting that. I thought this would be a complete trifle from start to finish. It mostly is. But there's a plot line in here that's done very effectively, that is very serious, and that will move you. So it's a recommend. This next one is nonfiction. I can't remember if we've seen any of these on this channel, but this is nonfiction on a subject that I know very well. It's on a subject that I have dealt with extensively, and it also can be done poorly. It can be done thoughtlessly, fearfully, or worst of all, condescendingly. And this doesn't do that at all. This is a nonfiction work by Jeff Hobbs, and it's called Show Them You're Good. Let me read you a bit about it here. The four boys in this book, it's four Los Angeles schoolboys from vastly different backgrounds as they seek admission to college. That's what we're following here, is that process. They're all very different, but they're doing that process together. The four boys are seniors at two very different high schools in Los Angeles, the second largest school district in the nation. Each young man strives to forge a distinct path into the American educational industrial complex, a competitive, nerve-wracking process with no guarantees. Each must deal with a particular challenge, and the book, the author follows these four in their different challenges. One is dealing with simply not caring. He knows it's important, but he just isn't motivated to care and has never been given that motivation by anyone. Others are challenged economically and a whole spectrum of different things. Some of the obstacles and challenges facing these boys merge into each other. Several of them are facing variations of the same kinds of challenges. And the author does a fantastic job with this. I know boys at this age very, very well. I know their complexities, I know their vulnerabilities, and I know most of all that we should be taking them very seriously. We're letting them down. In America, we are badly letting them down. And we're going to reap the harvest of that, because some of them who are let down will be bitter that they've been let down. They know perfectly well. They're not getting what they need. Some of them will be bitter enough about that to turn against society. Everyone will have to deal with them. And the ones who don't will be defeated members of society and lesser than they could be. And I always worry about that when people write about this subject. But this is the second book this year I've read that writes about young men, extremely vulnerable young men who are full of promise but have no answers, and does it really well. So if you're interested in that subject, or I guess particularly if you're a parent who has, for instance, a high school boy who you know down the line, 2 or 3 years down the line, is going to be applying to colleges, boy, oh boy, are you going to want to read this book. but anyone would. It's really well done. I will be this author's written 2 other books, and they're not on my radar, but I will be watching for him from now on. Then this next one is Nicola Tallis. She's done other books. I've reviewed, I believe, every book she's ever published. And we saw this one. I had a good chuckle about it when we got the advance copy. I want you to double check the release dates of all of these books, because I don't know that any of them are still June releases. They're just on my June shelf because that's the date on the book. That's the date on the galley copy, and I have not checked to see if they've been moved to July or August or September. So we're just going to talk about them that way. Your caveat will be, if you're interested, don't be surprised if you go to order it and you're told that it's coming out in September. I wasn't going to double check 50 books before I made this video. But you can just hold my comments in reserve. They will still be true in September as they are now. This is Nicola Tallis' new book, Uncrowned Queen, which is a biography of Margaret Beaufort, and also an attempt to renovate the reputation of Margaret Beaufort, who was not human. She was not in any recognizable way human. I guess biologically she was. If you'd managed to get a skin sample and examine it, you would say, well, all right, this is definitely a human being. But she wasn't human in every other way. She had her morals and psychology completely shattered into 1,000 pieces when she was 10 years old, and had no guidance whatsoever, no mercy, no loving parents to go rushing to, crying for a week, telling them everything that I believed has been shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Instead, she was in the raw, cold, stony world when that happened at 10, and just continued. She scraped herself together into a composite of something resembling a human being from there. From an unbelievably, obscenely early age, she was a purely transactional creature. So by the time she was 20, she was not recognizably human in any way other than physically, and is an exceptionally unappealing character in history. So Nicola Tallis had her work cut out for her to reassess positively reassess this figure. And I want to stress right away, while I'm recommending this book, that she fails completely. She fails completely. Whenever the record actually touches on Margaret Beaufort, the reader, the modern day 21st century reader of that record, will recoil from what they're seeing. That has always been true. That was true in Shakespeare's day. That will still stay true. When you get past the verbiage of whatever biographer or whatever historian, and you actually touch on an unambiguous record, you recoil from what you see. However, this is still a strong recommend because this is a fantastic book on the end of the Wars of the Roses and the beginning of the Tudor dynasty. Wasn't expecting that. I thought this would concentrate more on Margaret Beaufort, and I guess I really shouldn't have thought that because there isn't a whole lot about her. I mean, you would only need an appendix to a book this size to write everything we know about her. But I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting this book to venture so far afield. And I guess, although it sounds uncharitable because I've never really bashed this author's books before, I guess I wasn't expecting her to do so good a job at writing on such a big canvas about such a big subject. But that's the thing that I took away from this book. That's the thing I loved about it. And if you like, York and Lancaster, I don't know how many of you like York and Lancaster, but a lot of you like the Tudors. And if you like the Tudor era, you're going to want to read this book. Then we have another piece of nonfiction. This is, I guess, now that I'm looking at it, there's very little fiction here. Okay, well, you knew that when you married me. This is natural history. We've seen this on this channel before. This is by Jonathan Slate, and it is Owls of the Eastern Ice. And this is about the fish owl that exists. What is the proper name of the thing? Let's see here. The fish owl, yes. And this is in the extreme northern and eastern provinces of Russia, where the author has to go to find this thing and deal with the natives and stalk it. I can speak from personal experience. It is often very hard to birdwatch an owl. Very, very hard. I tried it for a couple of years. I tried a mating pair of great horned owls right near here, 10 minutes away from here, and failed every time. I found their pellets. I found ample sign. I heard them plenty of times, but when they saw a single biped walking around in the woods, they knew perfectly well to be invisible, and they can. Owls can disappear rather easily. And this author has to deal with that. He has to deal with all of that, with the bureaucracy, with the locals, with the owls themselves. And as a result, you get a classic work of field natural history. I was reminded when I was reading this many times over of The Snow Leopard by Peter Mathiasson, a famous example of this kind of thing, where the book is not just a natural history of the animal, but a natural history of going out and trying to find the animal and all the people you meet along the way. If you like that sort of thing, I don't know if it's still coming out in September, but it is going to be a classic of the owl watching, bird watching subgenre. So then this next one is by David Stasevich, and it is The Decline and Rise of Democracy, a deceptively slim look at democracies all over the world and in recent history, how they intertwine with commerce, how they intertwine with militarism. It ends up being a really good look at the elastic life of democracy as a working thing, not a highfalutin pie in the sky idea, but a working thing. When democracy begins to exist as a physical thing, what are its characteristics? How vulnerable is it? What are its tendencies? And I was expecting this to be more theoretical and therefore less interesting, but it is fascinating. The author does a fantastic job from beginning to end. The chapter on that, I mean, it's a strand that runs throughout the book, but the chapter that concentrates on the relationship between democracy as a governing principle and an idea, a social idea, and Islamic societies is particularly good. But the author is also really good on the economic stuff, on what do you do if you are the East India Company and you have total suzerainty over a nation, over an area, and your organizing principle is economic, but you know that you need a governmental principle as well, because you know not every person in your territory is a member of your company. Then what do you do? What do you do in a circumstance like that? Would you ever, under any circumstances, choose democracy as that system? Just fascinating. A historical guide, yes, but also the way the writer writes about democracy as an actual physical thing, as opposed to a disembodied idea, is just fascinating. Just fascinating. And then the last one of this TBR BY is another thing that we've seen. It's another finished copy that we've seen. This is by Andrew Phillips and J.C. Sharman, and it's very similar. This is Outsourcing Empire, which is about the fact that the outreaching arms of the British Empire were mercantile. They were economic rather than social or military to start with, in a lot of cases. A lot of times that they were synonymous. A lot of times the mercantile entity involved had its own army, but often that was the outlier. Was that, we are a political state and we have members in Parliament, but our first feelers, our first tendrils into unknown territory will be economic. I've read so much stuff on this subject, on the East India Company and the Raj and the British colonialism and whatnot, and this is a worthy addition to that reading. Occasionally, a little bit of a tendency on the part of the two authors to chase subjects into the weeds, a tiny bit. But I'd be willing to bet that if you're interested in this subject, you're going to be interested in the weeds. So maybe that isn't even a defect. For me, it occasionally was, but mostly just superb, just a superb job. And that is it. That is 6 books that are marked for June. Whether or not any of them have subsequently been moved, I'm pretty sure the finished copies have not been moved. These 2 bottom finished copies are probably all set for June release. The others might have been moved, but one way or another, my verdict stands. And so I have read these things. I am working my way through my June shelf here, and I've read these things in different ways and with different degrees of surprise. Very much enjoyed all of them. So I'll list them down below, and I recommend them to you for the upcoming month of June. Keep an eye on them if they sound interesting to you. But I'm going to wrap this up, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.